Hey, this is Michael. I'm back with a new video. This is my second video on Yellowstone. My first one focused primarily on hiking and scenery, as well as touching base a little bit on how to identify signs of bear activity. This one is going to focus specifically on the wildlife moments that I was able to capture on camera during a spring 2022 visit. This visit, I made a conscious effort to take more video instead of just photography. That being said, I had plenty of amateur moments with heavy winds, a shaky camera, and oftentimes a significant wildlife event would occur right in front of me while I didn't have my tripod or my camera ready. But it was a fantastic visit, and aside from my first trip to the region with my dad in 2018, this one remains one of my most memorable trips. It was very productive in terms of wildlife viewing, especially bear sightings, and I'm very excited to share with you some of the animals that I was able to view and admire. I'm going to start things off right away with what remains to be my pinnacle grizzly bear moment within Yellowstone's interior. We had eyes on this bison carcass when suddenly this enormous grizzly bear stormed out of the tree line and straight down this steep canyon to clear the ravens and begin gorging on this bison. He made quite an intense intro. As he barreled down the canyon side, dirt would fly and large rocks would tumble and crack into one another. I didn't have my tripod ready or attached to my camera, so things are shaky here, but not wanting to miss a moment of this, I didn't even bother fooling with it. He's well aware of us, and even though the Yellowstone River separates the two of us, it was still rather intimidating and unsettling as he would raise his head and look directly at me with his eyes glaring and his jaws full of bison guts. What's unclear is whether or not this grizzly took this bison down, or if it had perished in the river due to its extreme efforts in surviving a harsh Yellowstone winter that often happens with bison. It's also possible this bear pulled this bison to shore. What's really remarkable is the sheer size of this grizzly. Here it is mid-late May, and he's already the size of a bus. To put his size into perspective, that is a full-grown bull bison carcass that he is feeding on. Multiple park rangers that I spoke with and showed pictures to mentioned to me that this is the biggest bear they've ever seen. One of them going as far to say that this is possibly the biggest bear in Yellowstone at that time. By sitting down and balancing my camera lens on my knees, I was able to get a few good photographs of this bear just before he would turn and slowly climb back up the canyon and back into the woods that he came out of earlier. A little while later, this coyote would nervously approach the bison for a few quick bites before scurrying off. He was very nervous, with his head on a swivel and looking around in all directions at all times. He was well aware of us, and who knows, could possibly sense the top of the food chain apex predator napping just beyond the tree line. This circle of life scenario would continue to come full circle as this subadult bald eagle would swoop in and land on the bison. This eagle is approximately 1.5 years old and a bit more difficult to identify, sporting its marble plumages as it undergoes its transformational process into adulthood. Once this eagle is around 5 years old, it will have developed its impressive iconic adult plumage and its snowy white head. It's at this stage of its life that a bald eagle is often misidentified for a golden eagle. The subtle differences are with the feathers on the legs and the shape of its beak. Our grizzly bear would eventually return to the carcass, but only to sit and guard. But what bear would be so foolish to challenge this grizzly for this carcass? So what do you think? Grizzly bear or black bear? This is indeed a black bear, one that's referred to as a cinnamon black bear due to the reddish-brown color of its coat. Here it was grazing on a tall hillside that was full of lush green vegetation and surrounded by woods. Perfect habitat for black bear. With a mouthful of grass, it was happy enough to look up and acknowledge me and smile for a photograph before slowly disappearing into the woods. It must have been rather warm this day in May, as this black bear appeared very quickly out of the woods and made a beeline straight for this small lake, where it didn't stop, but continued to swim directly across the entire body of water. This happened to be my first time ever witnessing a bear swim in the wild. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you, Yellowstone, for another wonderful wildlife moment. As we've seen, black bear can either be black in color or cinnamon in color, and in some instances appear very blonde. On the other end of things, a grizzly bear can appear very dark in color, which is why it's important to be able to tell the physical differences between the two. The differences are in the face, the ears, and of course the paw prints they leave behind. But most notably is the giant muscular hump that's between the shoulders of the grizzly bear that gives it its incredibly powerful digging ability.
Just as every cloud has a silver lining, so do most grizzly bears. They're given the nickname silver tip, referring to the white tips of their hairs that give them a silver outline. You can see here how their silver lining sort of mimics the top of the tall brush, helping them blend into it and difficult to detect.
This is undeniably a grizzly bear, and a rather big one at that, and one that I never even would have known was there if it weren't for stopping periodically to glass the meadows and the tree lines with my lens or my binoculars. Something that anyone hiking Yellowstone should be in the habit of doing.
Pronghorn. I personally find the pronghorn to be very interesting. They are the fastest land mammal in the northern hemisphere, capable of reaching 60 miles per hour at a half-mile distance before slowing. They are in a classification all to their own, not belonging to deer nor antelope. They are vertically challenged, having evolved on wide open plains free of vertical barriers. Because of this, the pronghorn do not jump fences, but will find areas where they can go underneath them instead. They take mental note and keep cognitive maps of openings and fence lines. Not so much a problem in the park, but outside of the park you can imagine how fences play a disruptive role in the pronghorn's life, impeding and blocking migration corridors, possibly harming them as they get snagged when going underneath them.
Here we have a mother grizzly foraging and digging as her cubs play nearby. I say cubs, but they are rather large and are sub-adult, meaning they are 2.5, perhaps 3 years old at this point. As amusing as this is to watch, we have to realize there is much more occurring here than just two siblings playfully roughhousing. If we look beyond it, we'll understand that what these bears are actually doing is they are honing in on their grizzly instincts, their survival skills,
as they prepare for a life on their own in the Yellowstone wilderness. A sow will keep her cubs 2.5, maybe 3 years, or a little bit longer depending on the availability of food. But it's when the grizzly enters her estrus cycle that is ultimately dictating when the emancipation of her cubs begins. It'll be a confusing time for them. One day they'll wake and find their mother uninterested in them, or intolerant, unwilling to share her space with them or help them find food. It's a sudden change and in stark contrast from whom they've perceived as their guardian and protector up until this point. But that's the beauty in it. She has been just that, their guardian and protector. She's raised them and protected them from other grizzlies, or wolves and mountain lions. She's taught them how to hunt, how to forage, and how to protect themselves, and how to be fully independent. In that role, she's been nothing short of magnificent, and remarkably, willing to do it all over again every 3 to 4 years. As mentioned, the period of emancipation can be a confusing and stressful time for cubs, and in some instances, it can be deadly. This would be the only video I captured of this young grizzly, a brief moment before it wandered out of sight. He was known as the Obsidian Cub, and just hours after seeing him he would be gone, forever, mortally wounded by a boar that was courting its mother. Its young, wild existence in Yellowstone tragically cut short at just 3 years. Apparently, this cub was having a tough time finding its independence, so much so that it was willing to approach its mom while a much larger male grizzly was present. A male grizzly can be a real danger to cubs, so perhaps Mother was still being protective when she charged her cub to get it to leave. But she was also at the peak of her estrus cycle and very intolerant of her cub by this point. Regardless, her charge would instinctively trigger an aggressive attack from the larger male grizzly.
The attack would leave the cub mortally wounded and sadly put down by park personnel the following morning. Here you get a real good look at the digging power of a grizzly bear, how it's constantly bulldozing the ground for pocket gophers and other rodents to eat. In my previous video, you can see some grizzly digs up close, one of which yielded a broken arrowhead. But this is the cub's mother, the obsidian sow, a tagged and well-known grizzly named for the area in which she roams. The other bear is the large male grizzly known as a boar that was courting her. Here they are, just 2 days after her cub's death and in the same area. They hardly seemed concerned about what had taken place, only focused on digging, eating, and napping. A pair of mating grizzlies can remain in the same area of each other up to 10 days. One day in Lamar Valley, known as the Serengeti of North America because of its wide variety and abundance of viewable wildlife, this lone wolf was out scouting ahead of its pack and moving at a good pace. She was heading straight for this bison and its calf, commonly referred to as red dogs for their color. The calf was favoring one of its legs, which might be why this wolf was even considering a takedown on her own. The calf is protected though, standing infinitely in the shadow of its ever-present mother. You can see her tail raised high, signaling agitation and distress. The wolf would make a few soft attempts before wisely backing off and slowly shrugging off through the sagebrush. I say wisely because a short time later I find out that she is a brand new mother to a litter of pups in a nearby den and belonged to the Junction Butte pack. The natural urge and instinct were here, but she had to be careful without the aid of her pack. After all, she had pups to take care of. Nothing says springtime like a Rocky Mountain bluebird. This was a really good visit with lots of wildlife, new areas explored, and even new friendships forged, and all during the year of the 150th anniversary of the park. But having experienced all these amazing moments, it would be impossible to predict that just 3 weeks after this visit, Yellowstone National Park would experience a historic 500-year flood event. In closing, I'm going to dedicate this video to the obsidian cub who died while I was on this trip. It's very unfortunate that this bear was having such a tough time separating from its mom, but 2022 didn't have to be its last year. There would be a sad twist to things when a few days after its death, I would learn that this bear was receiving food rewards from the nearby roadway and becoming quite used to it. Park personnel had to haze this bear away from the roadway and into the woods, possibly putting the cub in its precarious situation. It was between a rock and a hard place, the courting grounds of its mother and a larger male grizzly, and a roadway that offered rewards but resulted in hazings. You can imagine the stress it was feeling and the confusion it was having. It's why we say a fed bear is a dead bear. Like, I wonder if the tourist who threw half their sandwich at this bear would have any idea that it would be dead the next morning. We have to understand that the interactions we have with wildlife can have a butterfly effect and send ripples throughout their kingdom, setting into motion an infinite amount of negative outcomes. That's why it's imperative to appreciate and observe wildlife from a distance, and to do so respectably,
and to never ever feed the bears.
Well, thanks for sticking around on this video. I know it was a long one, but I just have so much stuff from Yellowstone and I really enjoy sharing it with you guys. So I hope to be back sometime soon, but maybe with something a bit shorter. Until then, stay safe.